Now that we've established the presence of sophisticated cultures in the Americas in the far distant past, we will now look at just who these people might have been in an attempt to find out not just where they themselves came from, but also the advanced knowledge they carried with them. After the last Sumerian dynasty fell around 2000 BC, Mesopotamia drifted into conflict and chaos for almost a century. Around 1900 BC, a group of Semites, Canaanites called the Amorites, had managed to gain control of most of the Mesopotamian region. Like the Akkadians, the Amorites centralized the government over the individual city-states and based their capital in the city of Babylon, which was originally called Akkad and served as the center of the Amorite Empire. For this reason, the Amorites are also called the Old Babylonians. In the period of their ascendancy over the region, which lasted from 1900 to 1600 BC, is called the Old Babylonian period. The Amorites were an ancient tribe of Canaanites, but who were technically not of Canaanite ethnicity, who inhabited the region northwest of the Jordan River as far as Mount Bel Hermon. In the ancient texts, they were said to have lived in the mountains, the highlands, and the coastal plains of Canaan. It is not clear whether the Amorites were actually this diffused throughout Canaan or whether the term was occasionally used synonymously with Canaanite. The Amorite name means literally the high one, a fitting name as the Amorites were said to be giants. The Amorites are first mentioned as having descended from Canaan, the first son of Ham, and as such were the first in recorded history to have been a priest of the Most High God Melchizedek. Melchizedek is also known as Quetzalcoatl, Hermes Trismegistus, etc., and was one of the serpent priests that we discussed earlier. They, along with many other tribes, occupied the pre-conquest territory of Canaan. Amorite may have signified either a single ethnic clan or a loose confederacy of tribes. At times, the Amorite name seems to be synonymous with Canaanite and to represent all non-Israelites who God commanded to be driven from the land. Canaanite comes from the root word Cain, which means serpent. There is evidence of them in Babylonia, where in the 19th century BC they established under their patronage the first dynasty at Babylon. The most powerful king of this dynasty, Hammurabi, put an end to Amorite domination and issued a famous code of law, the Code of Hammurabi, similar to Israelite codes. At the time of Joshua, the Amorites were living both east and west of the Dead Sea. They were subdued and gradually absorbed by the Israelites under the leadership of Joshua. It is quite likely that at one time the Amorites were the most powerful of all the pagan clans in Palestine. The Babylonians called the area of Syria and Palestine the land of the Amorites. That could explain ongoing feuds over these lands to this day. The Amorites lived in close contact with the Sumerians for a long time preceding their ascendancy over the region, so it's possible that they gradually adopted Sumerian religion over several centuries. The Amorites did, however, import a new god into Sumerian religion, Marduk, which they elevated to the supreme position over all other gods. In the earliest Sumerian sources beginning about 2400 BC, the land of the Amorites, the Martu land as it was called, is associated with the lands west of the Euphrates, including Syria and Canaan. However, the Amorites' ultimate origin may have been Arabian. For the Akkadian kings, Martu was one of the four quarters surrounding Akkad, along with Subartu, Sumir, and Elam. They appear as nomadic people in the Mesopotamian sources, and they are especially connected with the mountainous region of Jebel Bishiri in Syria called the Mountain of the Amorites. The ethnic terms Amuru and Amor were used for them in Assyria and Egypt respectively. Amorites worshipped, among others, the moon god, Sin, and Amuru, from whom their name may be taken. Amuru is sometimes described as a shepherd and the son of the Mesopotamian sky god Anu. He is called Baal Sadeh, the Lord of the Mountain, and he who dwells on the pure mountain. Amuru was also known as Ea or Enki and was the father of Marduk. The Amorite language was a Semitic dialect. The main sources for our limited knowledge about their language are proper names, not Akkadian in style, that are preserved in ancient inscriptions. Many of these names are similar to the much later biblical Hebrew names. It is unclear exactly where the Amorites originated, although ancient texts say they came somewhere from the west and that they fled to a western land where their copper mines were located after the exodus of the Jews forced them out of Palestine. Unlike the Moabites and Ammonites, who occupied areas sometimes overlapping the Amorite lands east of the Jordan, the Amorites were considered unrelated to the Israelites by blood. God promised to give the Amorites land to Abraham's descendants, but exempted the Ammonites and Moabites from Israelite aggression. The Amorites were thus listed among the Canaanite tribes whom the Israelites should drive out of the land when they came to Canaan from Egypt. However, after the Exodus, the book of Numbers indicates that the Israelites were willing to make peace with the Amorites, offering them the same terms given to the Moabites and Edomites. "Let us pass through your country. We will not turn aside into any field or vineyard, or drink water from any well. We will travel along the king's highway until we have passed through your territory." Seeing their vast numbers, the Amorite king Sihon refused this offer, mustering an army against the Israelites, who defeated him at Jahaz and claimed the city of Heshbon and its environs. They next defeated King Og of Bashan, also an Amorite, and seized his territory as well. Og is elsewhere described as the last of the remnant of the giants, whose bed was 13 feet long. The Amorites were said to be a seafaring people like the Phoenicians and had advanced knowledge of navigation, astronomy, building, mathematics, as well as metalworking, crystals, and alchemy. I was blown away to discover the Amorites were also known as mound builders, with mounds attributed to Amorite creation being found in Saudi Arabia that look remarkably similar to those found in the United States. There has been much evidence found in the state of Michigan of ancient copper mining going on so far back in antiquity that the coal extracted found in these ancient copper mines would crumble to dust upon touch. Someone thousands of years ago was extracting massive amounts of copper in Michigan and shipping it across the United States to what is now Florida, and then shipping it off somewhere presumably back to the Middle East. Evidence of an ancient port with many copper artifacts tracing back to Michigan mines, as well as ancient red hair mummies, has been found in Florida. At the very same time, circa 1000 BC, we find the construction of the first real city in the United States at a site archaeologists call Poverty Point, along the Mississippi River in Louisiana. Here, according to Linda Schaefer, Berber-style mound building in the New World begins with startling suddenness. Native Americans before 1492, page 6. Poverty Point was a trading city through which the copper wealth of the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes was funneled. Observes R. Ben Madison, utilizing megalithic ideas, Poverty Point's mounds are aligned so as to predict the vernal and autumnal equinoxes. At its peak between 1000 and 700 BC, Poverty Point had a population of over 5,000 people. Its direct territorial control took in the Mississippi Valley in Mississippi, Louisiana, and southern Arkansas. There were also noted 2 distinct districts in the city. The Phoenician ships with their Israelite traders and buyers used this port on the Mississippi for buying the ore that was transported down the river from Lake Superior and the Isle Royale. The fact that Poverty Point was divided into 2 districts points to a Canaanite Phoenician quarter and a quarter for the Israelites who traveled on the Phoenician ships. Evidently, a large quantity of the copper ore stockpiled by David for use in the temple passed through Poverty Point. Later, David's son Solomon continued importing the ore from Lake Superior in his grandiose building projects until it was finally exhausted. These Danites were migrating Israelite tribes from the Black Sea area who spawned a culture known to the archaeologists as the Hallstatt-Latini culture. Emerging in Central Europe and exploding to the west some 50 years later, the Danites pushed the Canaanite Berbers to the far north regions of Norway, Finland, and Russia. A few pockets remained in the Basque areas of Europe and in Pictland in northern Britain. The Canaanite Berber cultures of Western Europe were savagely disrupted by the invading Israelite refugees. First a trickle, then a flood began to flee from the ceaseless predations of this migrating people from the east. Thousands boarded their boats and set sail for the New World, and a massive surge of Berber immigration to North America from North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula was underway. As proven by a myriad of cultural innovations from the Beaker group culture which burst upon the North American scene, Professor Barry Feld dates a major wave of Iberian Canaanite colonists to the New World during this period. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Berbers wore what we call Mohawk haircuts, like many North American Indian tribes. Herodotus also mentions that the Berbers engaged in the same kind of vision quest commonly found in North American cultures. To this day, adds Madison, Berbers have the same kind of animal legends as North American Indian mythology. Berbers had arrowheads, spear-throwing devices, wore feathers in their hair, and wore fringed leather clothing exactly like the native peoples of North America. Following this great migration around 500 BC, we are left with 3 large and substantial Canaanite groups in the New World. The first, which had settled around Lake Superior in Wisconsin in approximately 1430 BC, it was nicknamed the Old Copper Culture by the archaeologists. Its continuation, the Red Ochre Culture, spread throughout Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana. The second group settled in and around Poverty Point, Louisiana, circa 1000 BC. Finally, the third group, which was the third great wave of Berber immigration, arrived shortly after 500 BC and was instrumental in the emergence of the Adena culture. The Adenas were said to be giants and were originally thought to have constructed the Ohio Serpent Mound. All these groups, explains R. Ben Madison, maintained some contact with their parent civilization, the Beaker groups, back in Europe and North Africa. But when the Danites exploded into Spain and pushed the Canaanites out, this disrupted what was left of the Beaker trade with the New World, and at roughly the same time, for reasons not yet understood, the Isle Royale copper mines were abandoned and there occurred a substantial decline in the New World in the use of copper to manufacture everyday tools and utensils. Jim Bailey writes that around Lake Superior, which was a focus of Canaanite colonization in those days, modern Oibe Indian legends say that their ancestors drove out a race of white miners. At the same time that the Danites and Celts drove the Berber Beaker culture out of Western Europe, the Poverty Point culture also collapsed. The reason the Poverty Point culture collapsed is not sure, but it seems its inhabitants dispersed somewhere to the west. However, one Berber culture in North America survived, the Red Ochre culture in Wisconsin. From this culture, along with the new influx of Berbers from Spain, a new civilization was beginning to emerge. The Adena culture, who, as we stated earlier, were known to be giants. The umbilical cord between Western Europe and North Africa was cut when the Israelite Celts Danites invaded Europe circa 500 BC. But like the phoenix rising out of the ashes, the Berber culture was revived from a different quarter after North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula fell under the influence of Carthage. According to R. Ben Madison, the remnants of the Berber Beaker culture on the Iberian Peninsula now mix with Danite, Celtic, or Celtiberian peoples, who began to trade with Carthage. The remaining Berber economies, such as Talcia, began to decline, while at the same time the Poverty Point culture faded back into the Louisiana Bayou country and its inhabitants fled to Texas. As a result of the situation in Spain, the Berbers returned to the New World in Carthaginian ships to begin regular trade with the American Northeast. The first well-known mound builders in American prehistory were the Adena, and explains Madison, quote, mound building was an important art in both their megalithic and Beaker phases. In North Africa and Western Europe, they buried their dead in stone tombs, which were then enclosed in large earthen mounds. Across the Atlantic and North America, this custom was continued. Many mound builder tombs are exactly the same layout, a rock tomb covered in an earthen mound. The historic copper trade apparently continued or was revived. Copper ingots of identical oxide shape have been found on both sides of the Atlantic, proving that around 200 BC, there was a revival of the regular Atlantic trade between the Mediterranean and North America. This involved copper from Wisconsin sent down the Mississippi River and out to Europe, suggesting traffic up the Potomac River from the Atlantic into the American interior. At roughly the same time, claims Harvard professor Barry Fell, waves of Iberian Punic colonists settled in North America. In 1838, writes R. Ben Madison, an Iberian inscription was discovered in Mammoth Mound, an Adena site at Moundsville, West Virginia. It was immediately pronounced by French and American linguists to be Libyan or Numidian. The brief inscription explains that the mound was a burial site for a notable named Tadash, and that his wife had built it in his memory. The Iberian Punic alphabet has also been found on inscriptions in Iowa, Massachusetts, Spain, and Lebanon, showing the Middle Eastern origin of the mound builders. Elder Charles B. Thompson was one of the first Mormon writers to identify the mound builders with the Nephites, whose story is told in the Book of Mormon. According to the Book of Mormon, there were two races here ages ago. One was the Nephites and the other was the Lamanites. The Nephites were a white-skinned, red-haired, civilized, industrious people, whereas the Lamanites were an idle, savage, and vicious people, delighting in war and bloodshed. The order was given to wipe the Nephites off the face of the earth, along with all record of their existence. In some battles, thousands were slain who were piled up in heaps upon the face of the land and had earth thrown upon them.